name is my name is Johnny. I'm live here with Forrest Maready. Forrest is a writer, a researcher, and a filmmaker. He's been exploring medicine, history, and public health. He's author of The Moth in the Iron Lung and Crooked, Man-Made Disease Explained. Welcome, Forrest. How you doing today?
Hey, Johnny, I'm great. Thanks for having me. Sounds like some storms going on both your end and my end, but hopefully we can have some interesting conversation here. Lots to talk about.
Oh yeah, it's unbelievable. Your work on the moth and the iron lung is so great. The people when they talk about vaccines, a lot of times they say, "Well, what about polio?" And your work really kind of goes into that, showing how there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of propaganda about that. Could you share a little about that?
Yeah, sure. Most people think of polio as a vaccine story, and that's really a myth. It's really a pesticide story. Unfortunately, the paralysis that began happening throughout the United States and a few other countries in the late 1800s, early 1900s was really more of a pesticide problem than a uh, virological problem. Um, Essentially, there were several enteroviruses that floated around. Enteroviruses are microbes that thrive in your intestines. And they were most well known for creating immunity. That's all that happened. No one knew. No one even knew they had an infection. It was so mild that no one knew. And in the late 1800s, some paralysis started popping up that seemed to have something to do with the enteroviral infections. They weren't quite sure what, but it seemed to have some tie to it. And as the story goes, people thought it was a single enterovirus, which they called poliovirus. But the reality is there were many, many enteroviruses that started becoming enabled in such a way they could cause paralysis at the same time. Now, they focused on one, poliovirus. That's the one they tried to make a vaccine for. But there were several viruses that did the exact same thing. So the polio story is really more about what caused these formerly trivial enterovirus infections to start paralyzing kids. And the reality is, it was the pesticides. They started a new pesticide in the late 1800s to combat the spread of an invasive species of moth in northern New England. And suddenly, epidemics of polio start appearing in the exact same place in the exact same time. I mean, you can actually trace the spread of polio by tracing the spread of the gypsy moth, because wherever the gypsy moth went, they would start spraying. And wherever they started spraying, polio would appear. So polio essentially had a first wave during the late 1800s, early 1900s from that pesticide called lead arsenate. It kind of went away because people started getting keen to the fact that the pesticide was absolutely toxic and horrible. And then there was a second wave of polio, which is associated with DDT, which was shortly after World War II. And that's where most people who have heard of a pesticide polio connection, they may have heard DDT had something to do with polio. And that's actually how I sort of got into the whole story. Was I had heard that DDT had something to do with polio, but I wondered, how could that be possible? If DDT was essentially invented in the 1940s, how could polio have struck America in the late 1800s when there was no DDT? And that's when I stumbled across the whole story of the lead arsenate pesticide they had invented to stop the spread of the gypsy moth in New England. So pesticides definitely can cause paralysis in such a way it resembles polio. I have to quote polio when I say it in this way. The reality is, my belief is the pesticides created essentially, I'll call it leaky gut. It's a little more technical than that, but we'll call it leaky gut in such a way that the virus was able to get into the spinal cord. So it's not just pesticides. I always have to stress this when I talk to people. It's not just pesticides causing paralysis. They caused a problem in your gut that allowed viruses to get to your spinal cord. And those viruses can definitely paralyze. They are nasty. If they get in your spinal cord, they will thrive. They can cause a lot of problems. And the human body is amazing at creating those viruses, or preventing those viruses from getting into your spinal cord. But something changed that allowed the viruses to start getting into the spinal cord. And the main thing was pesticides. So yeah, the vaccines. What do you say about the vaccines? Well, there was the Salk vaccine, which was injected. It didn't work. It just flat out didn't work. Now, it could create antibodies in your blood, but that's not the route of infection of the poliovirus or any of the other enteroviruses. They went into your gut and went straight to your spinal cord. They bypassed They bypassed your blood system. That vaccine was completely useless. Maybe a little better than placebo. The oral polio vaccine, which came out in 1961, and then really the full Cadillac version of it was 1963. That one actually works. I'm pretty skeptical about vaccine efficacy, but that vaccine works. But the problem is it has a nasty side effect of creating more polio because people who take the vaccine can excrete live virus in their stool and propagate the virus, which is going to happen whether there's a vaccine or not. And it's got some other problems with it. It doesn't really give you immunity in the way you want it. And as I mentioned, there were a lot of viruses that were causing paralysis. It wasn't just poliovirus. So it was a very, very narrow Band-Aid for a very big problem. And even the oral Sabin vaccine that came out in 1961 and 63 essentially had nothing to do with the eradication of polio. And polio is not eradicated anyway. It's still there. It's just floating around, and they don't check for it much anymore. So the vaccine program, this is the big sad picture, is all the vaccines that we held up as heroes and amazing and saved the day were absolutely meaningless. They had nothing to do with the disappearance of polio. The phasing out of DDT as a widespread pesticide had everything to do with it. We are no better off for the polio vaccine. It did nothing to stop the spread. The entire story is a myth, lore, fake. I think they wanted to believe in it originally. I don't think people were, intended bad things by telling the story of how the polio vaccine saved us. I think they genuinely believed it did. But the reality is it was a meaningless shot. It's like Dumbo's magic feather. It was a thing. It was a prop to make people felt like we did it. Science saved the day. But the reality is it wasn't science that saved the day. It was man that, ruined the day with pesticide use. So that's it in a nutshell. But I don't know. That's about as tight as I can tell the story. It's not a great story. It's a horrible story.
Well, it's important to learn from these, challenges so that we don't repeat them. And, this is something that seems like they did repeat with COVID, especially the part, where it seems like they changed the testing criteria once the vaccine came out, and a lot of what they called polio before, now they call it something else. Is that right?
Yeah. Now what happened is before the vaccine came out, paralysis of polio was defined as having symptoms for, let's say, 48 hours. If you had paralysis for more than 48 hours, you have polio. After the vaccine came out, they redefined polio to say, I think, I can't remember what the difference was. Maybe you had to have it for 2 weeks or something. So suddenly the numbers of polio plummeted just from that rule change. Now, I'm in the weirdo column in this, in that I'm convinced they were genuinely trying to align some different testing protocols. They wanted them to align so that they could compare before and after. And they had to do it at some point. They should have done it earlier before the vaccine came out. They didn't. And they said, okay, we've got to get these on the same page or else we won't have a baseline, to compare against. So I get why they did it. I don't think they were completely nefarious pharma goons at that point. They were getting there. Believe me, there was some definite bad behavior going on. But at that point, in the 1950s, I think they were still trying. I don't think they were completely bought and paid for by some secret cabal of demonic overlords, set upon ruining humanity with population control and other things. I think they actually meant well by that rule change. Now, a lot of people that talk about this stuff, they don't agree with me. They said, no, they were trying to make it look like the vaccine worked better than it did. And I'll accept that. I may be wrong about that. It doesn't really matter. The vaccine didn't work. The point is, the injected vaccine was pulled in 1955 because of a manufacturing incident called the Cutter incident that caused some contamination that led to, I don't know, 10 or 11 children dying. Nobody trusted the vaccine after that. And so no one really took the vaccine until 1961, which was the new kind, the oral vaccine with the little drops. And then that vaccine only covered one strain of polio, which there were three. The one that covered three didn't come out until 1963. So if you look at the polio going down on the graph, you got to look at 1963 because everything before that was basically meaningless. So tell me, how did polio peak in 1953 and essentially get down to zero well before 1963, which is when the three strain Sabin oral polio vaccine came out? It's the math just isn't there. I mean, forget all the stuff I've just explained. You can look at the chart, and anybody with logic will say, well, vaccine obviously didn't do anything because it didn't really start coming out until 1963. So, yep, it was useless. The rule change was a problem. It made the vaccine look better than it was. I talk about it in The Moth and the Iron Lung. There was a big meeting of scientists in Detroit. Where were they? They were in Chicago, and they were meeting to discuss why the Salk vaccine was so horrible. They were concerned. They all got together and said, "Look, our polio vaccine sucks. It's not working." And they gave all these anecdotal stories of, "Hey, these people got 3 shots. These people got 4. These people got 5, like boosted to the max." Does that sound familiar? And they were still getting paralysis. And they quoted a study from Detroit where they had actually done tests on about 1,000 people who had gotten what they thought was polio, and they realized less than a third of them actually had polio. The other 2/3 had different viruses or bacterial infections that were causing the paralysis. So I think there was a little bit of a wide-eyed, wow, we had no idea that what we were doing was so wrong. So, of course, at that point, the hook was set. They can't come out and say, oh, hey, by the way, we screwed up. The polio vaccine only covers less than a third of possible cases, and something else is going on that's making these viruses paralyze kids, and we don't know what it is, or we know what it is and we're too embarrassed to admit it. But humanity has a long history of not admitting to our mistakes. You know, if anything, we never learn from our mistakes. We double down and create more problems. That, you know, you talked about the germ of the dairy pill. The milk is the same story. It's a sequence of horrible mistakes compounded by more and more horrible mistakes.
Right. So raw milk, it was something that throughout history has been looked at as something that's medicinal and good for us. And now, you know, we pasteurize our milk. And this really dampens the nutrition value. Your new book, the germ in the dairy pail, that goes into this. What was the biggest surprise you've learned researching this topic?
Well, I just actually did a giant Twitter thread about this very thing. I knew I had heard that raw milk was not, well, let's say I'd heard that raw milk was improperly demonized, that it wasn't as bad as people thought. And that sounded fair to me. I assumed that. And I started looking into it. And of course, you go back and you go back and you go back. And so I was, let's say, the late 1700s, early 1800s, and there was a architectural phenomenon that changed a lot of milk, and that was the silo. That was a very big surprise to me. And of course, you hear this and you're going to ask, why would the silo have anything to do with milk or raw milk? And what happened was silos store food, forage, or what they call silage. That's food that's sat in the silo and fermented. Now, we typically, in the sort of natural health space, might think of fermented food as, you know, a positive thing, and in a lot of ways it is. The problem with the cows is it changed their manure in such a way they couldn't keep clean anymore. Before then, the manure was very easy to clean. And when they started eating the silage or the fermented foods from silos, the dairy parlors where the cows were milked, or their stables where they slept and sometimes were milked, became absolutely filthy. They were nasty. And that caused a lot of sanitation problems because, I mean, we like our natural health, but we don't want poop in the milk. I mean, it's just like common sense. That's not a good thing. And that's what was happening, was the manure was everywhere because it changed the way the cows processed their food. And another thing was monoculture farming, particularly with corn. Wheat was a very popular farm product before then. Wheat obviously made bread. They could use the stalks for bedding for the cows. They could use it for feed for the cows. Wheat had all kinds of farm specific purposes. But with the advent of transportation, steam trains, etc., monoculture farming came into its own, and people mainly started growing corn because per acre it yielded more volume than any other thing, certainly more than wheat. So guess what? Well, the corn is now the cow's bedding, and it makes for horrible bedding for the cows. It's nasty and it's harder to clean. The cows would eat it, and it's not great food for the cows compared to the wheat. And that was the second thing that really started to make the milk bad. Was raw unpasteurized milk was perfectly healthy before then. Every mammal on the planet has eaten raw unpasteurized milk. If they make it through an infancy, that's how they live. And there was nothing wrong with milk until we started basically industrial farming it, industrial food production. And through silos, which created the fermented feed for the cows, and through monoculture farming with corn, that changed what they were eating. And there were some other things I talk a lot about in the book called swill milk, which is where they were raising the cows on distillery slop, which is like the waste from distilleries that were making whiskey or rum, mainly whiskey. And the cows got very sick. They were very diseased, and they just kept feeding the milk to children, and children started getting very sick. So the notion of pasteurization came about because the milk was genuinely horrible. Some people might say, oh, raw milk is totally fine, and they never needed to pasteurize it. That was just a joke, and that was, a scam. And the reality is, it wasn't. They had to. The milk was horrible. It was nasty. It was dangerous. It was killing children. Now, of course, the answer should have been, hey, let's rewind. Let's go back to the way we were doing it, and let's figure out where we went wrong. Somewhere in here, we started screwing up the milk. But of course, humans don't work that way. We just forge ahead and say, okay, what's the Band-Aid? What can we apply to our current problem that doesn't require us to look in the mirror and figure out that, hey, this was our fault? Let's just find a new Band-Aid, a new fix, and say, hey, look, we fixed it. And that's essentially what pasteurization was. Pasteurization nuked the milk into oblivion. It turned what was a medicinal food into white water. It zapped everything useful out of it. So yeah, pasteurization works. It kills everything, but milk is not water. It's not white water. It was genuinely a medicine. It was a health food. It was something that humans had developed a symbiotic relationship with cows to allow them to populate their microbiome in such a way that they were healthy. I think it's not a luxury. Raw milk is not a luxury item that certain people can drink. I think it's necessary for human health, particularly European countries where, we're sort of attuned to cows. Now, you could say, goat milk for other people who that's what their people drink. For whatever reason, my people were dairy, were goat cow. Were cow milk, and so that's what our bodies are acclimated to. So, I think raw unpasteurized milk is not a luxury item that certain people should do. I think it's necessary. I think it's everyone should be drinking it that can. Of course, you have some lactose intolerance and some of that to think about, but. It's a crazy story. We made a lot of mistakes. The pasteurization killed the vitamin D. So what do? We add vitamin D. It's, milk is now fortified with vitamin D, and we act like it's a great thing. Like we're technology people and we've solved a great problem. Well, we created the problem, but we're fixing it with another thing. And then homogenization which is where they obliterate the fat molecules in milk so that they can control the amount of fat in the milk more easily. And a lot of science suggests that obliterated fat molecules aren't digested properly. So we screwed even that up. All along the way, we made so many mistakes with the way we treated milk, the way it was farmed, the way the cows were treated, the food that they were given, everything. We've screwed it up. And it's going to be really tough to go back to fix all those things. But we're going to have to at some point. Humankind will not survive if we don't unwind some of these mistakes we've been making over the last 150 years.
I just go back to the idea: the more natural, the better. And whether you're somebody of faith who believes everything was put the way it is, that we should enjoy it, or even if you believe in evolution and adaptation and the millions of years, getting things to a homeostasis. Either way, it's the more natural, the better. And so I appreciate you ringing the bell on this issue. People can find raw milk in their localities. There's a lot of different tools for that. Realmilk.com is one a couple of my friends use, so I'm gonna put that up there. And people can check out your book. It just came out, the Germ in the Dairy Pail. They're at Forrest Maready.com. And
I don't have the books on my website yet, but they'll be there soon enough. Maybe by the time they watch this, they'll be on there.
Yeah. And you're such a prolific author. You got a double feature. You're releasing 2 books at once. So, could you tell us about the other one a little bit?
Yeah, I'd been working on this other book for quite a while under a different title, and I don't do a lot of interviews. I don't like social media. I'm kind of I always have this term Amish 2.0. I'm interested in my small group of people, my tribe. And of course, I want to save the world and I want to tell people that these horrible things are happening. But I guess at some point you just don't care anymore. You want to save your people, your tribe, and you want to find your people too. So I don't go on social media very much. I like personal connections with people. I like meeting them face to face. And so I had this other book, and it's called The Reason We Kiss. And essentially, it came from a very deep dive into trying to understand immunity and affection. And in fact, the subtitle is called A Revelation of Health Through Centropy, the Affection, Infection, Connection. Okay, that's kind of a mouthful. What is centropy? Centropy is sort of a new thing that the word may exist. I'm not sure. I don't think I made up the word. I'm stealing it. If it already existed, I'm stealing it. So don't look it up thinking you're going to find out what it means, because I'm taking it and I'm giving it a new name or a new definition. But essentially, centropy is the study of the relationships between things. For a very long time, 150, 200, 300 years, we have used science to try and understand things. And science is taking things apart, right? It's reducing them down to their tiniest piece. We look at them under a microscope and we figure out this part does this and this part does that, and this is how they work together. Centropy is the opposite. Centropy is trying to understand the relationships between things rather than the things themselves. I say science zooms in, centropy is zooming out. Centropy is trying to understand how things work together rather than understanding the things themselves. So that sounds kind of ambiguous and, I don't know, chaotic. But entropy is a force in the universe that exists everywhere. Scientists study it all the time. Entropy, if you don't know this already, is the natural tendency for everything to decay. Buildings fall down, iron rusts, sandcastles get flattened either by the tide or by kids. Everything decays into chaos eventually, except for life. For some reason, life itself does not do this. Life grows in complexity. Life becomes more ornate. You start off on an island with 8 lizards, and you come back 50 years later and you have 1,000 lizards or 15,000 lizards. Everything in life gets more complicated and more ornate and more complex. And it's hard for scientists to explain this because it doesn't obey the law of entropy. So that's why I came up with this antonym for entropy, which is centropy, which is the study of why things become more complex over time. Science is zooming in, centropy is zooming out. It's trying to see a bigger picture of things. So there's a lot of mystery in the world of that science doesn't explain. And in fact, I've given up on science trying to explain them. You may have heard of terms, you may have heard of a concept of blood memory. Okay, this is just a very odd concept. Blood memory. What's blood memory? It's this notion that I feel anger toward something my great-grandfather suffered from. He was wronged. He fought in a war against these people, and he was killed. And I feel that anger. I wasn't there, but I acutely feel it. If you go to a battlefield, people will say, I can feel the death here. I can sense it. If you go to a sacred space, people can say, I feel joy here. There's something I can feel here. I can't explain it, but there's something here. Now, science will try and explain it. Science will say, well, maybe, emotionally you're feeling some weight from this and that. And the Bible talks about sins of the father, if, that a grandfather's sins like trickles down 2 and 3 and 4 generations later. And centropy, this thing that I'm studying and writing a lot about, suggests there's something biological going on, like a literal physical phenomenon that science might one day explain. I don't want them to. I don't care. I don't want to understand it. I just want to accept that it exists. And I'll give you a quick example. UCLA did a study with, I think it was some marine snails, where they taught them to react to, I think if they gave, what was it? They would give them an electric shock with a certain smell or a certain taste, give them electric shock. So they developed an aversion to that smell or taste. Those snails' grandchildren and great-grandchildren had that same aversion to the taste or smell. Okay? This wasn't taught. They didn't teach them that. It transferred somehow. Biologically, that behavior, that instinct transferred from grandmother to granddaughter. And in fact, there are similar studies where they've taken creatures like that, they've minced them up, this sounds horrible, into water, put other marine snails in that water, and then they have that same behavior. Okay. Something is transferring memory, instinct, behavior beyond genetics. Okay. Genetic determinism is dead. The DNA as a blueprint for life is dead. It does not work. It is completely a failure. 20 years ago, we started the Human Genome Project. You remember that? And we're going to map the human genome. We're going to throw billions and billions of dollars at it. And we're going to understand every disease. And we can do little A/B comparisons of a healthy person and a sick person. And we can find the missing parts and go, oh, click that, click that, click that, and you're healed. That has failed. That has completely failed. I don't say that with joy, other than to say the human body, any life at all, does not adhere to genetic determinism. Yes, genetics probably tell you what your skin color is going to be and your hair and maybe your height and some things like that. Of course, it's not like it's nothing. But the notion that you are destined to have some disease because of some genetic thing is extremely rare. It is not what we thought it was. I don't know if you remember years ago, I remember seeing a story about Angelina Jolie had a mastectomy, like preemptively. She was not diagnosed with breast cancer. She saw that she had a gene associated with it, and she preemptively, I think, had a double mastectomy. And I was shrieked in horror when I saw it, whatever, 5-8 years ago. But now I'm even more saddened, because our genetics do not determine who we are, what we are. There is something else biologically going on that transmits behavior, instinct, even memory, not at the time of conception. This is the problem with evolutionary theory. You get one shot, right? With natural selection, you have the moment of conception, all the genetic potential that's going to enter your body is going to do it at the moment of conception, and then it's over. So that's a very crappy system for information transfer, right? It's very inefficient. I mean, you've got your whole life, and you got 1 millisecond at conception that determines everything about you. I think that's completely bogus. Centropy suggests there are microbiological networks that are constantly updating, transferring instinct, transferring memory, all kinds of things. And this is not just between like human to human. This is between human to animal. This is why dogs and humans have such an incredible relationship. It doesn't make any sense genetically that dogs would try and lick their owner's faces constantly. When you come home, if you have a dog, any dog owner, your dog is just like, I want to lick your face. Please. I know you've told me for 7 years not to do this, but guess what? I still want to lick your face. Why is this? This is the title of the book, The Reason We Kiss. Why is this affection such a crucial part of living experience? And I'm convinced there is a microbiological network that transfers instinct, memory, behavior, health, all kinds of things that's constantly going on. That's why humans and primates and dogs and domesticated animals are so affectionate to each other. That's how we communicate with each other. It's not a genetic transfer at conception. It is a continual transfer from mother to child, from child to mother, from mother to child to sister and cousin and uncle. And this is why humans do so poorly in isolation. They get sick. They literally get sick. And people say, oh, they're just lonely. They need companionship. I say, no, they're disconnected from the network. They are literally dying because biologically they are dying because they're sick, because they're not getting any of the microbial update that they should be getting. So that's kind of the gist of Centropy. There's a lot in there. I'm skipping a ton of it, of course, but if you have any other questions about it, I'm happy to talk about it. But it's a fascinating concept that I think hopefully will become its own field of study. It will be something you might go to college and study. Hey, I want to study science. Well, hey, I want to study Centropy because I think there's a reason why cicadas hatch every 17 years that we don't currently understand and science can't explain. But there's some timing mechanism going on that allows these cicadas to communicate with each other over hundreds of thousands of acres that they all know when to hatch at the same time. There's something where trees can communicate with each other and warn other trees that there's a bug invasion coming. And trees, a mile, 2 miles, 10 miles down the road will start increasing their sap production to try and prevent the bugs from getting them. I mean, there are all kinds of microbial communication networks going on that we don't understand. And I think they exist. I think we need to talk about them because we're wrecking them. I mean, the problem is you live in isolation. You spend all your time on a screen. You don't see your family. You live in a geography that your people weren't, designed to live in. There's all sorts of ways you can screw this stuff up. And I think we have. I mean, you and I, people like us, are concerned about vaccines. We're concerned about our food supply. We're concerned about pesticides. I really started to become concerned about community and communion and touch and affection and all these things that we're not getting because of the digital world and because we live apart from our families and we don't actually see each other anymore. We don't, hug our grandparents anymore. And I don't know. There's a lot of health problems, I'm convinced, that are going on because of the modern way of living that has wrecked the natural community, connection, affection, all these things that we might normally do are being destroyed by modernity. And I think we're going to have to figure out a way to restore them if we are to truly restore our health.
That's amazing. Wow. That's really incredible about the snails. 3, 4 generations later, like having this memory. We know so much now about the microbiome, all the bacteria. Is this something that's coming through, epigenetically, or how do you think that is transferring?
Well, I'm the same way as you. I go to the science brain. I want to know what it is. I want to understand what's the mechanism, what are the protein structures, how does it work? I'm fighting that. I'm trying to say, you know what? I don't understand it and I don't want to. I want it to be a mystery. I want it to be amazing. I say this at the end of the book that one day I may be proven right, but I don't want to be proven right because it'll prove that I was wrong about science because I said science can never understand this. I think there are, I was just interviewed for a documentary that will be coming out soon, I hope, or sometime. and we were talking about viruses and bacteria, and there's a whole school of thought. There are people that don't believe viruses exist. It's just called terrain theory. And there's all sorts of bacteria and viruses are only part of the microbial picture. There's all sorts of other weirdo, esoteric microbiological critters out there. And he said, let's just, for the sake of argument, let's assume viruses do exist. Should we eradicate them? Like, what good do they do? And I instinctively, and this is as I was researching for this book, said microbes, bacteria, viruses, and all the other ones, prions, etc., are the essential internet of life. They are what enables everything to communicate and transfer. For instance, dreams. What are dreams? This sounds crazy. What are dreams? Well, it's your neurons. They're regenerating and you're making connections. It's like, well, what do you dream about stuff you've never seen, you've never been? Why do you dream about things that you have no clue about? Why are you dreaming these things? And it's like, well, you're daydreaming and your brain is it's like, you know what? Memory can be transferred through viral activity. Okay, we can put on our science hat and say this for just a minute. Memory can be transferred through viral activity. How complex of a memory? I don't know. Is dreaming potentially viral activity in your brain? You are getting memory transferred into your brain from viral activity that is not yours. You literally could be picking up other people's memories while you sleep, and that's what you're dreaming. Again, there's scientific, this is not woo-woo new age stuff. This is like scientific. If you want to go there, I'm not going to go there. I'm done with science. But if you want to, I'm sure you can look at the studies and figure out, yes, there are ways to transmit memory through viral activity. We don't totally understand it, but like I said, with the marine snail, it's happening. You can do it. But I mean, think about this. The monarch butterfly. Okay, a monarch butterfly. It starts its life cycle on a tree in Mexico. Okay, and then it matures and it becomes an adult and starts migrating northward. Okay, the butterfly has some children, and the children migrate even further northward. Okay. Then there's some grandchildren and they continue to migrate northward. And then there's some great-grandchildren and they continue to migrate northward. Okay. And then those great-grandchildren, or either the great-great-grandchildren go, hey, you know what? We need to be back in Mexico. And they turn around and they fly all the way back to the same tree in Mexico. Okay. The same tree, not the same mountain range, the same tree. And they start the whole process over again. Okay. How does genetics explain that? How does genetics explain I have a memory of something that my great-grandparents did? Well, let's say I have a memory of something my parents did, but I'm not going to do it yet. I'm going to wait because it's not my turn. And then the grandchildren, I have that same memory, but I'm not going to do it yet. It's just like, it boggles the mind. Behavior like this. Parasitic behavior is absolutely some of the most fascinating biology you can ever study. All these things, genetics doesn't explain it. There's not enough neurons, there's not enough genome in the human body to explain all the behavior we have. Like if you think about spiders spinning their webs, a spider web is perfect the first time. They don't practice, they don't get better, they don't learn from their mistakes. The very first web a spider ever spins is perfect. Spiders don't have enough storage in their body to know how to do that. They just don't. If you count what is genetically available to them to store the behavior to allow them to spin a web perfectly, they don't have room for it. Now, never mind all the other survival instincts a spider has to have, to survive. That one thing alone, they don't have enough storage information in their brain or their genetics to do it. But they do it. They do it perfectly every time. How does that happen? again, that's what the book is about. The book is supposing there is an entire world of microbiological activity out there that all living things are tapped into that allow for the transfer of memory, instinct, behavior, health, sickness. Sickness is absolutely necessary. It is a download of new information. I mean, this is the most intense download of information you'll ever get is when you're sick. So we were talking about antibiotics before we actually, started streaming here. And same for vaccines. It does really make you question, are we wise to be monkeying with our immune system in this way when there is an entire network of information transfer about instinct, behavior, memory, immunity, all these things that's happening behind the scenes? Should we be monkeying with this stuff? I don't think so. I think we're wrecking our health in ways that we don't understand because there is something very complex going on that we're just now beginning to see. And of course, people are going to go to science and say, well, maybe science can one day explain it. And I'd say, maybe. I don't care. I want to just go back. Like you said, I want to go back to a more natural way of living. I don't care if science explains it or not. You know what humanity is going to do with that knowledge? We're going to screw it up, just like we did with milk, just like we did with polio. We're going to take that knowledge and try and say, aha, we can fix it. We can put a Band-Aid on it. But the reality is we were better off the way, however, if your evolution, the way we had evolved, if you're intelligent design, you can say the way we were created, however you want to phrase it, we were better off in a different way, in an earlier manifestation of humankind, humankind 1.0. You might say, well, our life, we didn't live as long. It's like, well, okay, we didn't live as long. We lived to 70, 80 now. Well, what's your health like? How do you get to 80? Is your health as good? Were you as vital? Did you enjoy your life as much? Probably not. I think people, when they live 40 years old, they used to pack all the joy and excitement of 80 and 90-year-olds into that 40 years. So it's like, what's the true value here? Is it just, clicks on the calendar? Is that literally all you want out of life? I think we've gypped ourselves of a lot of vitality in our quest to extend our lifespan to infinity because, you lose a lot. You stretch it thin when you focus on lifespan rather than health span. So I don't know, a lot to talk about there. This is absolutely, completely bonkers. I'm sorry to have gone so far down the rabbit hole on this.
No, I love it. No, the butterflies, that's so great. I wasn't aware that their migration patterns were span multiple generations like this, and it is. It's how is this memory being passed down this way? It's really incredible.
Yeah, there's lots of examples of that in the book. The book is it's a crazy wild ride into the Mutual of Omaha Wild Kingdom. If anyone ever used to watch that show, it's a wild ride into what's out there. I mean, there's all kinds of behaviors like that are just unexplainable. I mean, there are coral reefs that spawn, their sperm and egg. These coral reefs extend for thousands of miles underwater, and they spawn their eggs and sperm on the same night. Okay, within hours. How do they do that? There is no plausible explanation for how thousands of miles of coral reef can communicate with each other and coordinate something of that timing. Same way with the cicadas. There are cicadas that have 17-year cycles. There are other cicadas that have 17-year cycles that are a different brood. There's like brood 8 and brood 10, and they're offset. And then there's some, I think they're called bamboo flowers that have these like 80 and 125-year, 135-year spawning cycles, and they'll just sit there dormant for 80 years, and they all spawn at the same time. It's something. There is something much more complex going on in the communication layer of life that we don't understand, that we're really clueless about. And it's strange to write about it in that I'm trying to say, look, there's stuff we don't know. I'm not saying I understand it exactly, but I'm proposing that there are some things going on that we're clueless and we need to be more careful about what we mess with. I mean, trees, for instance. Why do trees grow so tall, right? This is a good question. Why are trees so tall? There's no evolutionary advantage to growing tall other than you outshine your competitors, your nearby plants. You get more sun by growing tall. It's like, well, there's plenty of plants that grow fine short. There are trees that grow tall in areas that they don't need to be tall. So evolutionarily speaking, why are they tall? I don't know. But I know that every organism that has a sequential timing system, like cicadas or coral reefs, they're all underground. Like everything that has these really specific timing cycles that are all prime numbers, they're always underground. So that makes me think, I don't know, are trees, are they antenna? Are they picking up on some, quasars and nebula? They have these like things where they spit out something every 44 years. There was just a story. I think Smithsonian did a story that scientists had just discovered this. It was either a quasar or something that was like, it would spit out something every 44 minutes, like precisely 44 minutes. And it makes you wonder, are they picking up on something? Again, complete crazy talk. I get it. It's wild to even say these things. And I'm sure your listeners will go, whoa, what a whack job saying this. But there's no explanation for it. Science has no explanation for this stuff. We are so far from understanding why this stuff happens. But there's something going on, something very interesting, something beautiful. I think the fact that life itself is made better through affection, through connection, through community. I mean, what could a greater story be than say, hey, if we're going to heal, we've got to come together. We've got to hug more. We've got to kiss more. Like, we've got to love our animals more. Like, that's literally the stuff that keeps us healthy. I mean, that's an awesome story to me. You do a lot of study about vaccines or antibiotics and pesticides. It's all kind of horrible. This is a beautiful story. This story makes me happy. So I don't know. Let's hope it's true.
Make milk magical again, huh? We understand the microbes, but there's other stuff going on there, I'm sure, huh?
Did you say make milk magical?
Well, yeah, I was just bringing it back to the raw milk there.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, for sure. I mean, look, if a mother, a human mother, is breastfeeding and she is communicating immunity to her child, and not only that, her baby is communicating its immunological needs to the mother, who then alters her immunological response in the milk that she creates to keep the baby healthy. Okay, this goes on. This is insane, but it goes on. Is that happening with the farmer and the cow? Is the cow in you can't do it in industrial farming practices where they got machines on them. But if there's a dairy maid or a farmer milking that cow with its bare hands, with his head pressed into the side of the cow, is there a layer of communication there where the cow trusts the farmer and the farmer trusts the cow, and there's actual microbial communication through germs, through microbes, through viruses, through bacteria, where the cow actually, not consciously, of course, it's not like it's sitting there going, man, I think you might have a respiratory infection. I'm going to, up my vitamin B count. Obviously, the cow is unaware of it, and the farmer is as well. But I think there are those layers of interaction going on that are why life thrives. It's why life becomes more ornate and more complex, and why things tend to get bigger and more numerous over time. Because remember, science says that entropy is the ruling force in all the world. Everything turns to chaos. With enough time, everything dissolves into nothing. There should be no bands around Jupiter, okay? You've seen the picture of Jupiter or Saturn. You know how you have like the bands, and here's a slightly red, and then there's another slightly orange, and then a lighter yellow. That should not exist. That should be chaos. If we've been here for enough time, millions and billions and trillions of years, there is no reason why order should exist anywhere. And you don't just see it on the Earth, you see it out in space. You see order, even the way the Milky Galaxy is arranged in its particular way. There is order. And it shouldn't be that way, according to science. It should be chaos, and you don't see it. You see order everywhere. So back to the milk thing. Yes, raw unpasteurized milk is certainly medicine. It's better than medicine. And if you are the cow owner and you are milking the cow, I'm guessing it's even better. There is inevitably some microbial connection going on there between you and the animal. Look, cows can hold back their milk. If they don't like you, they'll just won't give you any milk. You got to give them a shot of oxytocin to chill them out, and then they'll give you the milk. But they can hold it back. And in fact, they can hold back the cream. The cream is the good stuff in the raw milk, and the cream usually sits at the top because it floats. It floats at the top, just like if you've ever seen a jar of raw milk, the cream will be at the top. The cream sits at the top of the udder, and the cow can constrict itself in such a way that you just don't get any cream, because the cream is the good stuff that it wants for its calf. So even that, just think about something as simple as milking a cow. There is a complexity there that would blow people's minds if you start thinking about it, about all the interplay and the connection going on. So, when you stick a cow in a dairy parlor and stick them up to a machine, on its udder, that's just like a vacuum machine, you're probably not going to get the same quality milk as you would if that cow knows you and trusts you. And I mean, obviously, these things at scale are nearly impossible for any commercial production to do. But you do wonder, what have we lost with technology? What have we lost with science and progress? And I think sometimes we may have lost too much. It may not be worth the benefits that we've been told it's brought us.
I agree 100%. Forrest, thanks so much for all the work you're doing. I'm looking forward to getting some raw milk, and I'm going to be emphasizing the importance of that. Yeah, chug it.
Yeah, it's it's making a comeback slowly. I live in North Carolina, and our commissioner or secretary of agriculture is trying like mad to have it completely banned. Even herd shares, which is where you can buy a part of the cow, and it's sort of a legal workaround. It's prohibition all over again. And if someone actually knew the true story of what we'd done to milk, that it was perfectly healthy and in fact much healthier than the pasteurized, homogenized, fortified crap they sell in the stores. I think anyone with a half a brain would say, we can't do this. This is dumb. We can't do this anymore. So there's certification programs for raw milk that they used to do that were very effective. They were very safe. They had better safety rates than pasteurized milk. And we can certainly do that again. It doesn't need to be the wild, wild west. We can have some sanity here. We can have a certification program so that people who are selling raw milk adhere to certain standards, and the milk is safe, and it's easy to do. And we used to do it. In fact, there were thousands and thousands of dairy farms that used to participate in a certified raw milk program at the turn of the century in the 1900s. But of course, with the rise of pasteurization and FDA and other rules and regulations, those all went away. So it's definitely possible to do it, and we need to. We have to find ways to return to health, and it's not going to happen through technology or science. It's going to happen by rewinding all the harm we've done. But I appreciate you having me on. I think the books will be interesting if people get a chance to read them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Lots of other countries are doing it. We've done it throughout all human history. Yeah, I think we can manage. So.
Yeah. Amen.
Well, thanks so much, Forrest. Look forward to talking to you again. And thanks for all the work you're doing. People can find you at forrestmaready.com. And check out the new double feature from one heck of an author.
I appreciate it, Johnny. Thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, mahalo, Forrest.